Most of you are aware, I'm sure, that on November 7th, there are two really important issues that are coming up to be voted on by the residents of the state of Ohio. As we read the Bible, and as Christians all over the world read the Bible, these are two biblical and moral issues. We don't see them as just being cultural or political issues. The Bible actually addresses both of these issues. One of them, as you know, has to do with the issue of abortion. And next week, Pastor Dan, will address that issue from the scriptures as to what the Lord says about it. Let me just tell you that Christians all over the world understand that it is sin, that's what God calls it, to take the life of an innocent human being. And the issue that's coming up is that you will be able to, if you so choose, to take the life of an innocent baby until it's considered viable outside the womb. That could push it even to the end of 9 months, as we are being told. And if a doctor says, I don't believe the baby will be viable, they'll be able to take the life. Pastor Dan will be addressing that. He sat on a board himself that opposes, a local board that opposes abortion and believes strongly in life. There are multi-millions of Christians who agree with us. The second issue is the legalization of marijuana, where that for adult recreational use. Now let me also tell you, because of the way that this is now used in our society, some of you have even told me it's everywhere, so many people do it. Because of that, it's crept into the Christian church, and many churches no longer speak against it. We will hear, because we love people and God loves people, and God wants your mind to be clear. There's other issues involved, but God wants your mind to be clear. Last week, while I was battling this never-ending cold of mine, I still have it, but I am progressively getting better. I caught a radio program coming from Lima, Ohio. Lima is probably 150 miles north of here, I'm guessing, off the top of my head. Maybe not quite that far, maybe 120 or so. But I caught a radio program, and I was able to hear Aubrey Adams, and she was talking about this vote that's coming up. I'd never met her until today, personally, though we've talked on the phone. And I heard it, and I thought, wow, this is really good. She's doing a very good job of just educating the public why this is bad policy. So because we believe it's a biblical issue, it's a moral issue, these are the things the scriptures have been given to address from God's perspective. I've invited these two women, Aubrey Adams and Corinne LaMarca, to come just for the purpose of sharing their stories and educating all of us, okay? So, Aubrey, who's first? Corinne, you're first. Come, please. Wonderful to have both of you.
Thank you so much, Pastor. Yes, thank you. It's not projected. Thank you, Aubrey. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corinne LaMarca, and I'd like to thank the pastor and his wife, lovely wife, for having me here today so that I can tell you a little bit about what we are doing in our communities and around the world, actually. I am the director of Jennifer's Messengers, and that was created in honor of my daughter to bring awareness to the rapidly growing problem of marijuana-impaired driving. But mostly, and my ultimate mission in all I do, is to stop the expansion of marijuana in our state of Ohio and in our country. I do these things because I'm hoping to inspire others and help create urgency about educating and advocating against the harmful hallucinogenic drug that is being normalized, legalized, and commercialized, thus making it more available to our youth, which it has shown to cause the greatest harm and kills innocent people on our roads every day of all ages. Now I'd like to tell you my testimony and describe how even the most innocent person can become a victim of marijuana. But I believe all users of marijuana are victims of the pot industry because they have been lied to by a addiction profit-driven industry that cares nothing about the lives of our citizens and our great country. She's gone and she's not coming back. That was the harsh statement I heard when I made my way to my mailbox one morning, not long after my daughter was killed by a marijuana-impaired driver on July 24th of 2012. I was confronted by a neighbor of mine that had recently lost his wife of 50 years. He asked me, "Can I tell you something?" And I thought he was going to offer me his condolences or possibly a bit of wisdom from my loss. But instead, he said very sternly to me, "You know, your daughter's gone, and she's not coming back." Apparently, he thought I needed to hear that truth so I wouldn't delude myself. It was shocking, and it startled me. But before that, I was slowly trying to process her loss and live without her in my life. No more telephone calls, no more plans, no more Jennifer to love and worry about. The hole in my heart was huge. There would be no future for my daughter in her personal life, in her career, and all the joys that would surely follow someone as accomplished as she was. Even now, 11 years later, it's difficult to process, but I live with this reality every day. This is the harsh reality of what marijuana can do. While at my daughter's funeral, I was asked to speak by the clergy as I sat there with my family and friends, all weeping in sadness and despair. I was so unprepared or able to pull myself together. When the clergy approached me, he held out his hand to me, and he asked me if I would speak. He told me that God would guide me and give me the words. I really didn't think that a miracle was possible at that time, but in my mind, all I could do was trust him. As he led me to the podium, something of a divine nature happened to me. I felt the warm spirit of God envelop me for the first time. In those words, in those moments after looking out at that congregation like I am today, wondering what the heck I was going to say, from the depth of my soul, I somehow found the courage and the strength to speak. As I began to speak, my voice that was previously hoarse from constantly crying for 3 days suddenly became low, clear, and steady. The words just started coming out, almost like I was observing myself speaking. I promised at that moment that I would work tirelessly for the rest of my life to prevent another such tragedy as ours. I said no one should ever have to feel this horrible pain of loss like we have from a senseless and preventable tragedy. I wanted this senseless tragedy to inspire something good and meaningful. I said that I would take this on as my mission, no matter where it leads me, and I knew God would provide me with the strength of this mission, and he has. Since that moment, my faith has carried me through the darkest moments of this journey, and I would not be here today without it. Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the last part of my beautiful daughter's life and how this crash all transpired. Jennifer was a skilled athlete. She attended Notre Dame College in Cleveland, Ohio on a lacrosse scholarship. Her major was intelligence and analysis research, and her goal after completing a successful internship with HIDTA, which is the High Drug Trafficking high-intensity drug trafficking of Ohio, was to fight illicit drugs in our communities. Yes, it was ironic. Her interest with HIDA peaked after completing an internship with them, and she received an award from them for outstanding contributions to the program as an intern. One of the requirements in her curriculum was to be fluent in multiple languages. Jennifer, in college, became fluent in both Spanish and Arabic. She was able to transcribe anything. And she was a spirited and loving young daughter who always helped me in need as well. She was a lifeguard, a tutor, a mentor, a high school lacrosse coach while in college. Even after her death, she was able to help others with a gift because Jennifer was a registered eye, organ, and tissue donor. That's the kind of girl she was. Jennifer was awarded the Student of the Year award in her curriculum. Her school honored her after her death by naming that award after her. I cannot tell you the pride I felt when Jennifer was given the honor to speak at her graduation. Then she glided across the stage to receive her honors diploma. She was such a leader, too, involved in her student government and other organizations. We were all looking for the great and wonderful things to come for her. After graduation, she had her first interview with HIDA, but their funding hadn't come through yet, so she accepted another job outside her field of study. She decided to take this other position as a district manager for a large chain, you have them around here, of stores, and help gain valuable management experience. The offer was just too amazing to pass up. A new car, a new iPhone, a great salary, and many other job perks were included. I always joked with her that my first job out of college was $17,000 a year. Hers was $70,000. I couldn't even fathom it. Then, one evening, just a few weeks after her graduation and working in her new position, she was called into work because an alarm was going off, and she was asked to meet the store manager that she supervised at that location that she oversaw. Without hesitation, she made her way to the store, and as she drove, she was suddenly and violently impacted by a 26-year-old man running a red light and driving severely impaired on medical marijuana, that he admitted afterwards. He was traveling 82 miles an hour directly into the side of my daughter's car as she passed under a green light. Her car careened out of control through the intersection and crashing through the front of a building, where my beautiful and intelligent daughter's sweet life came to a screeching halt. After the perpetrator emerged from his wrecked car, all caught up in the landscaping at the corner of the intersection, witnesses noticed he appeared unharmed. They said his eyes were bloodshot and totally glazed over, and he seemed confused and out of it. They said that they smelled pot. He asked them what happened. He didn't even realize he was in a car and that he crashed into my daughter and killed her. You see, this 26-year-old man was given a medical marijuana card from the state of Michigan for depression and was passing through the state of Ohio impaired on high-potency THC that is sold right now all over Ohio. Now, some people are under the misconception that medical marijuana cannot make you high and that it is safe to drive on it because it's medicine and they have a medical marijuana card, but this is totally false. In addition, most states do not have accurate warning labels on their marijuana products or warning labels about the drug-alcohol interactions, which is common among users. Some believe that a medical marijuana card is a get-out-of-jail-free card if they're caught driving under the influence. That's simply not true. These medical marijuana cards are handed out to just about anyone that asks for one simply by complaining about certain conditions that are predetermined by a non-medical board. Serious illnesses like Crohn's disease, multiple sclerosis, glaucoma, there's no scientific evidence or FDA approval. Many people end up worse after they use cannabis. I spoke with a mother recently, she was from Michigan, who told me about her son who recently graduated from college and who was desperate for help for his Crohn's disease, and he started using marijuana. He ended up taking his own life when he ended up with CHS, which is cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which causes cyclical vomiting. So he ended up in worse condition from when he started using marijuana. The evidence about this is mostly anecdotal in nature, and once recreational marijuana is approved, medical virtually goes away. Right now in our state, they are trying to expand it from 70% to 90% in the medical marijuana industry, which is outright insane. I say that if this is really medicine, then we need to treat it like medicine, putting it into a double-blind study, peer-reviewed trials, and regulating it through the FDA, plus controlling it through the pharmacy board, like we do with other medications. But marijuana is an hallucinogenic drug, not a medicine. People conflate the fact that the FDA has approved other forms, like Epidiolex, used for seizures, dronabinol, used to increase appetite in cancer patients, for medical purposes, but that is very different. You know, we all have a responsibility to learn the scientific truths about marijuana. Some people say it needs more research, but in actuality, there is around 45,000 peer-reviewed medical articles written in PubMed, a medical website, used for peer-reviewed medical publications. The government has spent over $1 billion in research, too. That really shocked me. So today, start your research. Just don't believe me. Watch our podcast on Every Brain Matters. It's a great website, lots of resources. Be sure to look at our Think You Know campaign on Parents Opposed to Pot, which I created because I thought I knew what marijuana was. But today's marijuana is much different than years ago, but even then it was very potent. Every Brain Matters for your family support and science as well. Check out Jennifer's Messengers, which is my website, for impaired driving facts and stories. If you haven't already, try to take some time to read these books and see for yourself. They will give you an in-depth look at the marijuana industry, its many victims, and prepare you for your own advocacy work. I had no idea the danger this dangerous drug was causing until I got my rude awakening and started learning about it and reading testimonies on MomStrong website. There's an increased risk of suicides, bipolar disorders, psychotic breaks, some resulting in permanent schizophrenia. It can lower one's IQ as much as 8 points and change and destroy brain pathways permanently. Many report violent acts that seem to come out of nowhere that have been connected to marijuana use. There are physical risks of cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which is a cyclical vomiting disease, and Aubrey will talk more about that, cannabinoid use disorder, and more. Our ERs are being flooded with users with terrible pain and agony and are looking for help. It's no secret that our youth today are being bombarded with lies and marketing ploys constantly on the internet through social media. The marijuana today is extremely addictive with its high potency, and there are new and sometimes hard to detect delivery devices being sold to our youth. The industry is constantly looking for new customers for life. That's our youth. This is why they market as they do, with flavors, colored wrappers, making it look like candy, putting sugar on it, and advertising geared toward them. They also specialize in making products undetectable to parents and school staff. Now, a brief comment about the media's responsibility. This was the headline: my daughter's story at the crash scene in Cleveland. Car hits business, woman 22 dies. Well, we all know that there's so much more to the story than that. The public's not getting the whole message about marijuana impaired crashes from the media, and to top it off, the statistics are skewed because once law enforcement has somebody on a drinking charge, they don't test any further. Law enforcement should use oral swabs right on the spot to detect that this drug is present, and they are available and they're not that expensive. Remember, impaired driving is impaired driving. There's no valid excuse for endangering the lives of others. Now, I never thought that I would have to visit my daughter here in a cemetery because I tried so hard to keep her safe, and I only dreamed of her bright future. But through all of this, I have fought hard to find a new purpose in life, which is the real last step in the grief recovery process. I've also learned that when we help others, we end up helping ourselves. After all, we need to try and squeeze every bit of happiness out of our lives because all lives are precious, including mine. And that was an important stepping stone for me to realize because the emptiness of this was so unimaginable. One more thing that I've also learned that I'd like to share with you is that you can make a difference too, through advocating and educating about the horrible outcomes stemming from the marijuana expansion in our country. Right now, we are a small group of individuals and organizations all over this country, so it's no secret that we need warriors to help us fight this drug expansion. People are waking up every day to the dangers that are present. Some have experienced them firsthand, like me and like Aubrey. I say don't wait until it touches your family. You'd be surprised what a difference you could make. So the sad truth is, once marijuana is even more accessible and more people think it's okay to use because it's legalized, and they put their stamp of approval on it, then these tragedies will become more frequent. It is estimated that with continued legalization, an additional 7,000 people, think about your family, and if one of the members of your family was one of these people, will die on our roads next year. If you think it can't happen to you or someone you know or love, you are mistaken. When this does happen, there are no warning signs. There's nothing you can do to avoid it, and it can end a life like my daughter's in the blink of an eye. Jennifer never saw him coming, nor did countless others. I feel so sad for everybody that's lost their lives to this. Yes, it's true. My daughter's gone, and she's not coming back. But that doesn't mean there aren't countless other lives that can be saved by stopping this marijuana train that is barreling down the tracks in our direction to expand legalization. We need to hold our lawmakers accountable and pass laws that protect our children and our communities, not sacrifice them on the cannabis altar. When they use this argument of how it will help our state's budget, but it has been shown in other states that have legalized that it's less than 1% of the total budget, and that every dollar made, $4.50 is being spent in social services to help the people because of the aftermath of pot. Why are we selling our children's future to anyone? They are our future, the backbone of our country, the fabric of our country. I believe we can do this by working together, keeping our faith strong, and getting the truth out. We need resources, and we know we are up against the big dogs. This is a $30 billion a year company. Not industry, I don't want to say company. And it's basically just one marijuana industry. There's not several, it's just one that gains from this. So with that, I'd like to say, please join Jennifer's Messengers and Every Brain Matters to help bring awareness to the ever-growing dangers and help us advocate against it. I'd like to thank you for your time today. You've been an amazing audience, and I'm just so happy to be here today. Thank you for having me, Pastor and Ann. And now I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce somebody who's just been an amazing support to me through this all. She came here to support me from Houston. And she is here today to speak with you about her experience. She is actually from Pueblo, Colorado originally, and she's experienced firsthand what marijuana can do.
Thank you so much, Corrine. I've heard Corrine speak many times. We're very good friends over this, and I'm amazed of her courage and her strength. I love her very much. It takes a lot of effort to do what she does, so thank you, Corrine. And Pastor, how long do I have to present? I just want to make sure that I'm doing the time right here. 30 minutes? Okay, all right. Okay, are we good? Well, thank you, Pastor Wesley Rowe and your wife, Ann, for having us here today. You know, due to the lack of education and well-funded campaigns, the public is being deceived when it comes to the regards and the effects of marijuana. The Drug Policy Alliance wants all drugs legalized and commercialized. So where does Ohio draw the line? So in this presentation, I will share the reality of the expansion of marijuana. First, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about myself too before I get into the presentation. You know, I am Aubrey Adams. I'm from ground zero of this marijuana expansion movement, Pueblo, Colorado. The industry was able to sink their teeth into my community because it's a disadvantaged community with a lack of education and a lot of poverty. And we have a lot of water in Pueblo. We have a big reservoir there, and these plants take a lot of water. So I'll share what happened to my home and my community after we legalized. I'll introduce my organization that I developed with Corrine called Every Brain Matters. I'll talk about the costs. So when you see the little red man with carrying the weight of the money on the back, that's the cost, and that's what we all pay for. And then I'll talk about some solutions. So like I said, I'm from Pueblo, Colorado, which I used to call Colorado's best kept secret. We have beautiful hikes, good family town. We are involved with our kids' school and with our church. We were known as the home of heroes because we had 4 Congressional Medal of Honor recipients there. And we are also known for our Pueblo chili. So we don't talk about Hatch chili in Pueblo. We have our own chilies, and we love them, and we do a big festival every year, and we roast them in September, and the whole town smells wonderful, these roasted chilies, and it just brings an excitement that fall is soon to come. But after legalization came, everything changed. Pueblo, Colorado is now known as the Napa Valley of marijuana, where drugs, homelessness, and crime, and the smell of dead skunk, which is marijuana, is everywhere. And I mean everywhere. In our movie theaters, in our shopping centers. The worst place was in my son's school at his 8th grade graduation. It was a very uncomfortable situation because the teachers didn't know if somebody had used it in the parking lot and just smelled like it, if somebody had the product on them. All we know, we were celebrating these kids and being exposed to the smell of drugs. Here's a picture of a homeless couple in the center, begging for weed outside our Pueblo West Walmart. There's a homeless person in the car. We call them marijuana migrants. They all came to Pueblo because they wanted to make a fortune in the marijuana industry, but came with no resources, so they ended up being homeless. And we're a prideful community. We take care of the people in need in our community, and we were overwhelmed. Our social services, they were just devastated. We couldn't keep up. Also, that's a large marijuana grow that is now going out of business because the damage is so done in Pueblo that the demand is going down, and we've been able to get some other policies passed to what I call cut into their profits. And then at the top is a baby bib. It says, "Don't hurt our future, Colorado kids." My mom and I hung these baby bibs in all the marijuana shops in Pueblo because the marijuana industry, 70% of the marijuana shops got caught selling and recommending marijuana to pregnant women. They promised they wouldn't hurt our children. They're already hurting them in the womb. And before legalization, you know, my family was a normal family. That's me giving my son Zerberts when he was a baby. The middle picture is him as a Boy Scout. He got his cycle badge that day, and he was pretty tired. He rode 50 miles, and we iced his quads that night. And then the picture at the end is of my husband and my 2 sons. That was right before my family got sick. My eldest son entered the 8th grade in 2014, right when the recreational or marijuana shops opened, and his behaviors changed. He started self-harming. By 2015, he was a freshman in high school, and he became irrational, paranoid. He was inconsolable. He was repeating things that didn't make sense. I was witnessing him go into psychosis, and I'll explain more what that is later. He was having delusions. He was violent towards his younger brother, that his younger brother ran barefoot through the snow to get away from him one night. My son then tried to take his life. He was hospitalized, discharged, still suicidal. I took him back to the ER where I was told it's just marijuana, and we were sent home. Well, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't leave him alone. I didn't understand what was going on. I knew my son wasn't in his right mind, and I was so scared he was going to kill himself. Soon I took him back to the ER, and they did hospitalize him, but in a different town because there were no available beds for him in our town of Pueblo. When he was discharged, he told me he was using dabs, and I had no clue what a dab was. And he said, "Mom, it's like really strong marijuana," and he called it crack weed. Well, through my research, I found out dabs are high concentrations of THC, the addictive chemical in the marijuana plant that they now call medicine, and they put in vape pens. He told me he knew it was making him feel crazy and was actually trying to quit. But addiction took a hold of my son, and by the next year, not only was he using marijuana, but he was using meth and heroin for a few weeks. I couldn't find treatment for marijuana abuse, so I volunteered my family for crisis intervention with the Department of Social Services. And not only did marijuana legalization change my son, but it also changed my community too. It brought crime into my neighborhood. This is a picture of my neighborhood. This is where we lived here, where this yellow dot is. We owned this home across the street too. I was chased down the street here into our back alley by a young man who was obviously psychotic, said he just got out of the hospital. The hospital was located down here. And he wanted me to give him a ride out of town because he said the whole town of Pueblo was about to blow up. This street was blocked off because there was a psychotic woman with a gun here in this house. This is where a shooting happened, where a teenager shot another teenager. The teenager that did the shooting was selling and growing marijuana with his parents in their home, and they were happy to supply that to my son and have him sell for them too. This was a marijuana grow home. This one turned into a marijuana grow home. This one turned into a marijuana grow home. This is where my friends lived. They had 3 small children at that time. They couldn't let their children play in the backyard because of the smell of marijuana smoke coming into the backyard and because of the illegal drug activity happening up and down this alley. This one had a home invasion to steal their marijuana on a Tuesday afternoon. This is a K through 8 school, which is now closed because people are moving out of this community, as you can imagine. Who would want to live with this crime? And this all happened after legalization. Worse, a gang shooting and a car crash happened here. And here's the pictures of that day. Gangs were shooting at each other, crashed their cars. Nothing like this had ever happened in my neighborhood before. Amendment 64, which was the legalization of marijuana in Colorado, turned every home in Colorado into a potential drug house. And this issue too will do it here too. And worse, 3 blocks north of me, just feet away from my parents' garage, Mr. Brad Fowler was one of those people that was growing and selling marijuana from his home, and he was killed over a marijuana transaction, and he laid deceased on the streets on a Friday morning at 9 a.m. And not only does the legalization of marijuana allow an addiction for profit industry into your neighborhoods and market to your kids, but on the south side of Pueblo, right next door to an alternative high school, where kids are already struggling with academics and emotional issues, moved in a marijuana head shop where kids can see shiny, colorful bongs and pipes and clothing and advertisements glorifying and normalizing marijuana. They even have a person outside waving a sign saying, "Come get your free pipe at Mary Jane's." And Pueblo, Colorado has marijuana scholarships for every high school senior. It's a brilliant marketing plan by the predatory industry to groom future users. It's a way to advertise to them and normalize marijuana under the radar. The Pueblo Hispanic Educational Fund displays these marijuana scholarships on the front page of their website. The city lines up the children on the front steps of the courthouse for photos. Can you imagine watching this display while your son is addicted, psychotic, and suicidal from marijuana use? As a result, 27% of Pueblo's youth are using marijuana often. And half of those kids are now using the more potent products from the industry, like the vapes and the edibles. And people don't know this, but my friend and I would take people from other states and other countries on marijuana tours of Pueblo to show them the true impacts. We would show them homes destroyed from growing marijuana. They would see underground bunkers to grow marijuana. We would drive them by criminal organizations, and one of them moved right next door to my friend, who, as a living, taught kids to ride and train horses for a living. But soon the families were too scared to come out to her property, and now she's moved out of Pueblo. I took these pictures while standing on their property. This is where the marijuana is being grown behind the fence. And by the way, the DEA busted this place twice and they still came back, so it's still in operation. This is where they were making the dabs that I showed you the picture of, the high concentrated products. These types of drug labs cause explosions and fires and attract crime and violence and deplete our precious resources, especially in Colorado, like our water. And so getting back to my family story, my son kept relapsing back to marijuana, what he called the safe drug in medicine at the time. Social services had discharged us, saying they couldn't help us anymore. It was really hard. We were in crisis. My son was gone a lot to the streets. People were harboring him in his home. They were allowing him to use and sell their marijuana, and I couldn't afford the treatment options I was finding. In the meantime, my husband became depressed, suicidal, and he was having emotional outbursts. I was coddling him, thinking he was just in so much pain watching our son destroy himself. And then my husband tested positive for marijuana and was suspended from his job. He said the bartenders at work told him to smoke 24% THC flower and his panic attacks would go away. And they were right. His panic attacks did go away, but it also harmed his brain. He was hearing voices and having conversations with them. He was going into psychosis too. And as a result, now my husband requires 4 pharmaceutical medications to stabilize himself. And then somehow a miracle happened. We found treatment for my son in San Diego, a dual diagnosis program, and a place that did not minimize marijuana's effects on his brain. This is a picture of me and my 2 sons, or just my 2 sons, on La Jolla Beach, where I was allowed to take him out of his treatment facility for 3 hours. Then I found Houston, Texas. It's ground zero for the youth recovery movement, so I came from ground zero of the marijuana recovery movement and found this place. They have alternative peer groups, host homes, recovery high schools. And my son went there in 2016, and he became a very strong leader in this recovery program. And for the first time, he had sober peers and a community that supported his health. And he achieved over 3 years of sobriety. I left this slide blank because relapse is part of the disease. We moved to Houston. This is where I get emotional. We moved to Houston. We had a great year with my son. He worked incredibly hard at his recovery, but he had went back out, he relapsed, and we didn't see him for 2 years. But then another miracle happened. And he showed up at my younger son's high school graduation party, and he approached me in the kitchen and he gave me a big long hug. But he didn't look well, but I'm very grateful for this moment for him to show up and support his brother. After this, I moved in with family for a financial reprieve because this destroyed my family's finances too. Then right before Christmas, my son called and he asked for help. And when I picked him up, he looked like he was dying. He was skin and bones. He couldn't eat. He was having severe abdominal pain. He was only testing positive for THC. So I helped him all I could until it turned into enabling. And when he was with me, he would walk 7 to 8 hours a day, trying to calm his brain down, chain smoking cigarettes. And he refused treatment, so he went back out on his own. And I haven't seen him since Mother's Day. So as you can imagine, this has been a very painful journey. And I know that I'm not alone. This has affected many families. And what I've learned through this experience is that families are unprepared to prevent, manage, or recover from a loved one that's addicted or psychotic from marijuana. So I and other families developed an organization called Every Brain Matters to advocate and support families and protect families. And that's why I'm here. I want to protect your families. I want to protect your state. You know, this isn't about a plant anymore. What Ohio's going to vote for is what I call industrialized marijuana. It's about the THC molecule in the plant. They make products to look like normal foods that have sugary flavors, and make them in vapes, so parents, educators, and employers don't even know that the person's using. So what is industrialized marijuana? Well, it's a fat-soluble drug. It's not like alcohol. I don't advocate for alcohol use, but alcohol is a water-soluble drug. So they want you to regulate marijuana like alcohol, but you can't do that. This is a fat-soluble drug. And what that means is it adheres to the fats in our bodies. And does anybody know what the fattiest organ is in our body? You can't answer, Corrine. Anyone just guess? What'd you say? The brain, exactly. Usually people say the liver first. That's the first time that's happened. You must work in the medical field. So this is the difference between alcohol and marijuana. One hit off a marijuana vape or one swallow of a marijuana edible can induce a psychotic episode. You can't do that with alcohol. You can become psychotic from alcohol, but you got to abuse alcohol for many, many years to achieve that. There's the brain, the fattiest organ. So this is industrialized marijuana. THC-flavored water, that's marijuana. Sugar powder, THC powder. Pills, that's a THC pill. This is industrialized marijuana. THC toothpicks, inhalers, peanut butter THC cookies, sleek, cool-looking vapes, birthday cake flavored vapes, vapes that look like crayons. This is THCA, 99.9% THC, the crack of marijuana. This is high concentrations of THC. They call this shatter, butter, crumble, wax, dabs, and more vapes and the candies. Vapes, to me, are weaponized. They're easy to conceal. They have sugary flavors to entice everyone. The high concentrations of THC, they're locked and loaded. They have poisonous addictive chemicals added to them like lead and arsenic. If they didn't put the sugary flavors in these products, kids would spit them out because they taste like chemicals drenched with weed. This is purposeful, to give a fast, potent hit, a chemical assault to the brain. And their business model is increase the THC content in the products, which will increase the risk of addiction, which will increase their profits while society pays the price. And the potency, this is just a chart I put in there, the potency has just steadily risen since legalization. This is purposeful, like I said in the last slide, because they need it more potent, because they need more customers addicted. They need more and future users, and they have to addict those people. So old school marijuana is actually safer than industrialized marijuana because it's lower potency. And the most offensive part of this marijuana expansion movement is the deception about social justice. You know, will industrialized marijuana shops in a disadvantaged community or marijuana being grown in homes really reduce the incarceration rate? No, and it hasn't. So I put the science here on this slide. The arrest rates for marijuana with African Americans is still twice as much as Caucasians, and now the Hispanic and Asian populations are having their incarceration rates go up. 28% of women living in low-income areas are testing positive for marijuana. How is that going to help their children? It's not. In states that have legalized marijuana, minority use are showing much larger increases in use of marijuana than their Caucasian counterparts, and the pot shops are disproportionately located in impoverished communities. And even this is a chart from a marijuana magazine. They talk about it all the time. Because higher income places have more money to fight the industry and keep these pot shops from not opening in their area. And I won't go over this slide much, but youth is going up, regardless of what they say. The stats are very vast. These numbers are from children that are in school, and mostly the highest rate is with our young adults from 18 to 25, and the brain is not developed till way over 25. So at Every Brain Matters, I brought you guys a gift. I gave you this chart that I developed. It gives the short-term and the long-term effects of THC. It has a QR code that you can go to a web page and resource everything. They have live links. I have like informational icons on every box, so you can look up and read the science yourself and make it very easy. We also have informational brochures that explain, what is cannabis use disorder or addiction, what is cannabis-induced psychosis, and the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome that Corrine talked about. I'll talk a little bit about those now. So cannabis use disorder is addiction to marijuana. The rate used to be about 10% with the old school weed we used to have. Now 30% of marijuana users are becoming addicted to marijuana. And what is cannabis-induced psychosis? Nobody ever hears about this, but this is an epidemic in our country. Psychosis, what I witnessed with my son and my husband, is a break from reality. Some of the symptoms are paranoia, delusions, hallucinations. And some people that become paranoid can become violent against themselves or other people, and it is a factor in school shootings. We do track that, and we are trying to get educational campaigns, but it takes a lot of funding. But this is my friend Sonia and her son Joshua. Joshua had 2 episodes of cannabis-induced psychosis, and then Sonia had reached out. She had found me on the internet and called me and started asking me questions. She wanted to learn more about what was happening with her son because he was acting not like himself. You know, he thought he was God and had a lot of delusions. So he was in recovery when they contacted me. I spoke to Joshua on the phone. He didn't want to use anymore. He wanted to get better. But the addiction calls the brain out again, and he started using again, and he was on his 3rd psychotic break. He said the voices in his head told him to go to LA to save God's children. And when he was coming down from his psychotic break, he was feeling really low. You know, it's really hard on a kid like that, you know? And he stepped off the bus that he was on his way back to Houston, and unfortunately, he stepped in front of a train. And his mother called me and told me this. He died right before Christmas, and then she said, Aubrey, you gotta come talk at his memorial service. You need to tell the people there what happened to my son. And I did. It was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. And the science is clear and strong when it comes to cannabis-induced psychosis and its link to schizophrenia. So out of all the drugs that can cause an episode of psychosis, cannabis or marijuana is the worst offender with the highest conversion rate to schizophrenia. So that temporary episode of symptoms of psychosis, 47% of those people will convert to chronic psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia or bipolar with psychosis. And Colorado knows this too. Just this past February 23rd, the Department of Health in Colorado delivered a report to Colorado's General Assembly that said frequent marijuana use by Colorado youth is associated with psychiatric disorders such as hallucinations, paranoia, delusional beliefs, and schizophrenia in adulthood. And the symptoms are worse with the higher content of THC. And at a press conference at the Capitol of Colorado, Dr. Chris Rogers said, inpatient psychiatrists have a front row seat of the emerging epidemic of cannabis abuse and addiction that threatens to swallow the lives of a whole generation of Coloradans. On our adult inpatient unit, it's hard to keep count of the number of psychiatric and suicidal patients that are admitted with THC on board, and the story on our adolescent unit is even more tragic. We repeatedly treat kids that are too psychotic to know what is real, who they can trust, where they are, and the rates of adolescent psychosis have risen steadily since legalization. And more evidence just keeps coming out to support this. This is just a study that came out just September 27th of this year. It studied 9.8 million Canadian people. And one of their biggest reports, a lot of things came out of this study, but they said half of the young males, 14 to 24, presenting in the emergency department with cannabis-induced psychosis receive a diagnosis of schizophrenia within 3 years. It's a very harmful, hard drug. And like I mentioned before, it's linked to suicide. The #1 drug in Colorado teens' suicides is marijuana. And this is Levi. He was one of the first we lost. The directions on the package said he should only eat 1/8 of the marijuana cookie. Well, I don't know about you, but I can't eat 1/8 of any cookie. I can't do it. I want the whole cookie, and then I want more cookies after that. Well, he ended up not feeling the effects, and he wanted more of the cookie, and he ate about half the cookie. He had a psychotic break. He was pulling the pictures off the wall in the hotel room and his friends were at, and screaming he was God, and he jumped off the balcony to his death, and he was only 19 years old. And then the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome that Corrine mentioned in her presentation is when you get at toxic levels of marijuana, which we saw with my son the last time he called for help, where he was skin and bones and he couldn't eat. So you can get at toxic levels with any drug. When you get at toxic levels with alcohol, you vomit. You usually recover within a few hours or a day, But with marijuana, since it's fat soluble, when you're trying to vomit because you have too much marijuana, cannabinoids, it's the chemical in the cannabis or marijuana plant. When you have too much, the person's trying to vomit and get rid of it, but it adheres to the fats in our bodies, so the receptor sites, and there's a system called the endocannabinoid system. It's a regulatory system, and it gums up that system so the person can't necessarily get rid of it as easily as if they had consumed too much alcohol. So cannabinoid means the chemicals in the cannabis plant, including the CBD. Hyperemesis is excessive vomiting, that's what that means. And the syndrome, because they diagnose it with the symptoms, there's not one specific test for it. And yes, people are dying from this. If they don't quit, they usually do end up dying, every single one of them, because you can't be at toxic levels of a drug and survive. So this is Braniel Danielson. His parents allowed me to tell his story. He actually worked for the marijuana industry in Washington State. He had CHS. He actually quit, but he ended up dying from a seizure. And most people are dying from organ failure because it just shuts down your system. You can't vomit that long. You need to be able to nourish your body and keep hydrated. And that's how they're dying. And of course, the marijuana issue is linked to the opioid use disorder. Our overdose rates should be going down. They said marijuana would cure this. You know, it's not. It's excelling because we are fueling it. And there's lots and lots of science that supports this. We could talk for hours about this, but I'm no expert. So we put it in simple forms in this pamphlet. And one of the things that we've learned from science is they do predictor rates. And the number one predictor for opioid use disorder in adulthood is marijuana use under the age of 18. And here's the overdose rates in Colorado.